Take a slow, deep breath and release it like a leaf floating downstream. Let your thoughts settle like soft mist over ancient stones. You are here now, safe, quiet, and ready to drift. Our story begins in the same secluded fold of the world where lanterns whisper and time forgets its shape. Nestled near the Lee River, behind a curtain of bamboo and silver poplars, lies a hidden village. It is a place that doesn't mark itself on maps, only hearts. And in this village, far beyond the murmurs of travelers, and even deeper than the breath of the mountains, there is a garden. But not just any garden. This one blooms behind an old stone cottage with windows that blink like sleepy eyes, and a crooked roof shingled with moss and memories. This is the home of the Clockmaker. He was old, yes, so very old that even the tallest willow called him grandfather. No one knew his real name, for he had long since traded it for the rhythm of gears and the company of sparrows. But everyone knew his cottage because in the dead of night you could hear it ticking. Not loudly, not harshly, just gently, like the heartbeat of the village itself. The Clockmaker's garden was a miracle. Each flower bloomed on its own time, a lotus that opened only when the moon was full, peonies that unfolded at the chime of 3 a.m., a trail of plum blossoms that shimmered as the hour turned at dawn. It was as if the plants themselves listened to the clocks in the workshop and synchronized their beauty to the bells and clicks of his careful hands. And the Clockmaker, he did not rush. His hands were slow, steady, never hurried, never wasteful. He believed that all things deserve their own time, and to hurry beauty was to break it. Each morning, with the mist still resting in curls between the rocks, he wound the great garden clock. It stood at the edge of the pond like a sleeping crane, its long arms pointing toward the sky. The clock was made of polished wood and brass, weathered with wisdom. Flowers bloomed up its legs, vines embraced its frame. And when it ticked, the wind listened. Today, however, something unusual stirred. As the Clockmaker placed his fingers on the winding key, a feather soft and white drifted down from nowhere and landed on the minute hand. He blinked, for no birds were flying overhead. Not yet. And then he heard it. Tick, 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 tick. The sound was wrong. Too fast, too eager. Like time had suddenly tripped and was tumbling forward. He studied his breath. He touched the clock again. It felt warm. Not like metal, but like skin flushed from fever. The garden responded too. A tulip bloomed sharply too soon. A petal fell from a chrysanthemum that had not even opened. The koi in the pond darted beneath the lily as if hiding from something unseen. The Clockmaker whispered, "Easy now." His voice was like velvet worn thin from years of soft speaking. He turned the dial slowly backward, and the ticking softened. But the feather remained, and so did the question. Where had it come from? That night, beneath the moon, the color of jade, he sat at his workbench. Tiny gears rested in rows. Springs glinted under candlelight. But his eyes kept returning to the feather. He had placed it in a bell jar near the sill, where the night breeze teased its edges, and then he heard the second sound, not a tick, not a chime, but a hum, faint, like a lullaby remembered in a dream. It came from the garden, from the direction of the hydrangea arch, the one that only bloomed during eclipses. Slowly, silently, the Clockmaker rose, lifted a lantern, and stepped outside. The garden had changed. It wasn't just the timing of flowers anymore. The paths had shifted. The air felt warmer. The stars above seemed closer. As he walked beneath the boughs of cherry and fig, he saw the impossible. A second clock, standing just beside his own, identical, yet not. Its frame shimmered slightly, like heat rising off summer stones, and it ticked backward. The old man did not panic. He only tilted his head, eyes soft and curious. Time, it seemed, had brought a guest, and the garden was listening. Close your eyes. Let your breath rise and fall, like lanterns drifting on a river of stars. Feel the air cool around your cheeks and the hush of earth cradling your thoughts. You're safe here in the folds of time where only gentle stories bloom. The clockmaker stood beneath the pale moonlight, lantern trembling just slightly in his hand. Before him, where once there had only been a lone timepiece rooted in decades of care, now stood its twin silent, silver, and humming softly in reverse. He leaned closer. Its arms moved backwards, drawing time not forward, but inward. The frame was unfamiliar, and yet not. The carvings along its legs curled like vines, but instead of peonies and plum blossoms, they were etched with unfamiliar flowers, blooms with five-lobed petals shaped like tiny clock faces. A few of the carvings shimmered as if they had been freshly engraved, but there was no sign of a tool. The air around the second clock pulsed softly, like a heartbeat underwater. And then, as if sensing him, the backward clock released a faint chime, not a warning, not an alarm, but a lullaby. It was the same tune the clockmaker had once heard in his dreams when he was a child sleeping in a silk-wrapped cradle, long before he ever touched a gear or spring. The memory swept over him like the fragrance of an old perfume, his mother's voice humming to the rhythm of raindrops. He whispered, "I know you," but clocks do not answer. They only remember. The garden had become still so still. Even the usual rustle of bamboo was absent. The koi had gathered at the edge of the pond, their eyes bright and glassy as if watching a ceremony. Then, with barely a sound, the minute hand of the backward clock ticked once more, and where it pointed, a flower began to bloom. It rose straight from the soil smooth, silver, unfamiliar. Its petals unfurled in reverse, revealing a spiral center like the whirl of a shell. As the flower opened, the old man noticed something odd. A tiny moth fluttered out from inside and flew backward through the air. He blinked, and it was gone. The backward clock ticked again. Another bloom, another moth, another ripple across the garden symmetry. The clockmaker placed his hand gently against the wood. It was warm, not in the way of sunlight, but like something newly alive. He pressed his palm to its side and whispered, "Where have you come from?" The chime answered him once more, but now he could hear something layered within it, a voice very faint. He leaned closer. It's time. A girl's voice, soft, childlike, but echoing with age. The clockmaker's eyes trembled. He stepped back and held the lantern higher. "Who are you?" he asked the air. No response. But his own clock, his familiar clock, ticked in reply. He turned and noticed the vines from the original clock had stretched toward the second, as if they wished to connect. But something resisted. Where they touched, the leaves turned gray and brittle. "Too fast," he murmured. "They're out of rhythm." He looked at both clocks, their hands moving in opposite directions, one pulling forward, one drawing backward. And between them, the garden had split. The west side, where his original clock stood, remained lush and rooted in the warmth of time's steady breath. But the east side, where the new clock shimmered, was shifting. The plants there began to bend strangely, curling like thoughts unfinished. Some flowers bloomed and unbloomed, their petals retracting like shy sighs. A rose turned to a bud again, then to a seed, then vanished. The clockmaker had never feared time before, but now something uncertain stirred in his chest. He did not want to stop the backward clock. Not yet. But he would need to listen more carefully. He turned to head back into his cottage, the lantern casting his long shadow across the tangled path. Just as he reached the garden's edge, something brushed his shoulder, a feather, not white, but gold. He caught it midair, and this time it was warm. He placed it in his pocket, stepped inside, and closed the door with a soft click. Tomorrow he would speak to the clock again. Tonight he would dream, and in his dream, a garden bloomed beneath a sky that ticked backward. Take a deep breath in and slowly, gently let it go. Feel your shoulders sink like stones into a quiet river. Time here is a cradle, not a race, and every moment is soft enough to hold. When the morning came, it did so shyly wrapped in a silk mist that hung low over the garden's shoulders. The clockmaker opened his window to greet the day, as he always did, but today his breath caught. Dew clung to the petals of the lotus blooms like tiny glass pearls, and between the winding garden paths, something new had formed overnight, a trail made entirely of sand. Fine, white, and shifting ever so slightly with the breeze. It hadn't been there before. He was sure of it. He stepped outside, careful not to disturb the sleeping violets near the step, and followed the sand. It meandered gently between his two clocks, his own and the one that ticked backward and then looped toward the old greenhouse, long abandoned and crumbling beneath ivy and years. He hadn't opened it since his wife passed. It had been her sanctuary, a place where she'd grown moonflowers and jasmine and things that smelled like stories. After she left, he'd locked the door and let time turn it green. But the sand trail knew its way, and as the clockmaker approached, he saw something curious. The greenhouse door was open. Only slightly, just enough to whisper. His hand trembled as he pushed it. It creaked like an old violin string, a soft groan that disturbed the stillness for just a moment. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of moss and lemon balm, and hanging from the beams like floating memories were dried herbs wrapped in silk ribbons. And standing beneath the central skylight was a girl, small, barefoot, wearing a dress the color of river stone. Her hair was long and black, tied with a single thread of red silk. She stood facing away, looking at something he couldn't yet see, but she didn't flinch when he entered. She simply said, in a voice both young and impossibly old, "You're early." The clockmaker blinked. "Am I?" She turned. Her eyes were a soft, stormy gray, the kind of color that clouds take on when they re about to cry but dawn to. She smiled. "I thought you would arrive after the fifth petal fell." He looked down. At her feet were 5 petals, golden, shimmering faintly. He took a slow breath. "You brought the second clock, didn't you?" The girl nodded. "I didn't bring it. I remembered it. And when something is remembered with enough care, it finds its way back." She stepped closer and gently reached into her pocket. From it, she drew a small hourglass. But it was unlike any he had seen. The sand inside wasn't falling, it was rising, climbing gently from the bottom bulb to the top, glowing faintly as it ascended. "This," she whispered, "is the seed of the garden." He stared. "You mean the garden began with time?" She tilted her head. "The garden began with love. Time just helped it grow." And with that, she placed the hourglass onto a table covered in moss and dried mint. As soon as it touched the surface, the entire greenhouse brightened. Light filtered through the skylight and seemed to linger, wrapping the space in warmth. The girl sat on a bench woven with vines. "Do you remember when you first wound your clock?" she asked. The clockmaker closed his eyes. "Yes, I was 12. My mother had just passed. I wanted to stop the pain. I thought, if I could measure time, maybe I could mend it." The girl nodded. "And you did, in your own way." He opened his eyes. "But now the clocks are fighting." She shook her head slowly. "They're not fighting, they're balancing. One remembers forward, the other remembers back. But both," she smiled, "both are telling the story." The clockmaker sat beside her. "What story?" he asked. The girl leaned in, whisper soft, "Yours." Outside, the sand path shimmered in the sunlight. A breeze drifted through the cracked greenhouse panes, and a chime rang far in the distance, 2 notes, perfectly tuned. He didn't ask who she was. He already knew. The hourglass hummed softly between them, and the garden beyond seemed to breathe. One moment forward, one moment back. All in time. "Subtle and gentle soul," Let the hush of falling petals lull your thoughts. Let the world fade behind you like an old silk screen, and allow your heart to sway softly with the turning of the hours. Rain arrived quietly that evening, not in heavy sheets, but in gentle threads, like the earth had begun to hum a lullaby only the garden could understand. Each droplet landed like a secret on leaf, on stone, on roof soft, measured, unhurried. The backward clock glowed faintly in the dimness, and across the glass panes of the greenhouse, water traced curving rivers that vanished just as they formed. The clockmaker lit a lantern. He stood again beside the girl in gray, watching the hourglass rise, its sand now nearly reaching the top. The reversed flow moved like breath through silk, never rushing, never halting. "She's close," the girl whispered. "Who?" the clockmaker asked. The girl smiled without looking up. "The one who planted the first seed." He stepped back, brow furrowed. "You don't mean..." But before the words formed, a soft breeze swept through the greenhouse door. The chimes outside his wife's old ones, long silent, began to sing, high and clear, as if stirred awake by something familiar. He turned, heart slowing. Outside, the garden shimmered in the rain. Mist curled along the stepping stones. The sand path glistened like pearls, and there, just beyond the pond, she stood, not as she had been in her final days, tired and still, but radiant, cloaked in the same blue robe she wore on their wedding night, her hair braided with honeysuckle, eyes warm as midsummer dusk. The clockmaker dropped the lantern. It didn't shatter, it simply landed softly on a patch of moss, its flame flickering like a candle caught in breath. He walked toward her, steps slow, reverent. She didn't move, didn't speak, only watched, as if waiting to see if he remembered the rhythm of the garden. He did, each stone, each curl of vine, each whisper in the rain. When they stood only a breath apart, she lifted her hand and placed it gently over his chest. "I missed the ticking," she whispered. He swallowed. I tried to hold time for you." Her smile deepened. "And now time holds us both." Behind them, the backward clock ticked once more. The girl in gray stepped into the rain, bare feet silent. She held the hourglass in her palms like an offering and approached the pair without a word. Then she lifted the glass toward the sky. The last grain of sand reached the top, and the rain stopped, not abruptly. It simply paused mid-fall. Droplets lingered in the air like silver beads, weightless and waiting. The wind stilled, the pond calmed to glass. And in that perfect stillness, the garden began to shift. Buds opened in spirals of light, trees hummed with warmth. The two clocks, once ticking in opposite rhythms, began to sync. One forward, one back, but now in harmony. The girl stepped closer. "This garden was never just yours," she said softly. "It was hers, it was theirs, it was Time's." The clockmaker nodded. "And his wife," she leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "It's not about how long we have," she whispered. "It's about how gently we let the moments bloom." A single silver petal fell from the vine overhead and dissolved in the air before it reached the ground. The world exhaled. Time resumed its gentle ticking. Then the rain, like a curtain, fell once more, washing the garden in memory. The clockmaker closed his eyes, and for the first time in many, many years, he rested without counting the seconds. "Take another soft breath, dear dreamer. The rain has quieted to a whisper. The world is wrapped in velvet hush. Let the garden draw you in once more, where memory is sent and time unfolds in bloom." The morning that followed the rain arrived tenderly, as if not to disturb the still damp petals. The garden was quiet, yet pulsing with newness, a kind of stillness that hinted something sacred had passed through. The pond had returned to a gentle ripple, stirred only by the gold-ringed koi beneath. The clockmaker stood at the heart of it all. He hadn't spoken much since the rain had paused, since time itself had held its breath. His hands, though old, felt lighter. The lines on his palms seemed to trace new paths, as though destiny had rewritten something while he wasn't looking. The girl in gray was already awake. She stood near the crescent-shaped sundial, watching the shadow slowly stretch. Though the sky was overcast, the sundial somehow knew the hour. Time in the garden didn't always need the sun. "There's a bloom," she said softly, not turning to him, "that only opens once every 100 years. The clockmaker approached her slowly. "In this garden?" She nodded. "It's called the lantern orchid." He blinked. "I thought that was just a legend." "A myth," she smiled. "Most myths are truths wrapped in memory." He followed her gaze to a patch of moss just beyond the backward clock. There, cradled between two stones, was a single bud. Pale violet, its edges shimmered faintly like dew caught on glass. "It was planted the year you were born," the girl said. He looked at her. "I never planted anything there." She turned to him now, her gray eyes glowing. "Not you, her." His breath caught. "The greenhouse, the seeds, the small packets she used to keep in the drawer by the fireplace, always tucked between folded linens and waxed string." His wife had once said, "Some flowers wait for the right soul to bloom near," and now here it was. The bud began to move, not fast, not dramatic, but with the slow confidence of something very sure of its purpose. Its petals unfurled like paper lanterns opening to light. Each layer shimmered with color, not quite nameable hints of moonlight and hush and violet dawn. "It's blooming for you," the girl whispered. He crouched low, heart suddenly fragile. "Why now?" "Because you stayed," she said. "Because you listened. Because you didn't rush time." The flower, now fully open, gave off a scent unlike anything he'd known. It wasn't sweet or sharp. It was memory itself. It smelled like warm paper and old ink, like tea left steeping by candlelight, like the sleeve of her robe when she reached over him to wind the clock. The clockmaker closed his eyes, letting the scent carry him. He remembered laughter in the rain, her fingers dusted with pollen, the way she used to hum when she tied herbs in bundles, the way she'd whispered, "Time is just a garden that we water with kindness." When he opened his eyes again, the girl in gray had placed the hourglass beneath the flower. Its sand now still began to shimmer. "The bloom and the clock," she said. "Together they begin the second garden." He frowned softly. "Second?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded parchment. Gently, she handed it to him. It was a map, drawn in faded ink, filled with delicate curves and dots. But this was not a map of roads or rivers. It was a map of hours, of days that hadn't happened yet, of years to come where flowers had not yet been planted but would be, and in the very center was the lantern orchid. She spoke softly. "Your task was never to keep time still. It was to teach it to bloom." And in that moment, the backward clock rang 12, not with chimes, but with silence. A deep, knowing hush that folded into the earth itself. The petals of the lantern orchid trembled gently, and then a single drop of dew fell from its center, landing on the hourglass, the garden side. The koi leapt, and the world, both forward and back, took one long, peaceful breath. "You're safe now," wrapped in quiet. Let the ticking fade behind you like footsteps softened by snow. Let your mind drift, each word a leaf, each breath a lullaby. The lantern orchid remained in bloom for exactly 1 hour, not a second longer. Its petals, after releasing that single drop onto the hourglass, folded inward again, cradling something within. The color dulled to a soft, dusty lilac, and the flower rested like a closed eye, content to sleep again, perhaps for another 100 years. The clockmaker stood in silence. He had witnessed clocks strike 12 1,000 times in his life, but never like that. Never with a silence so complete. It felt like the world had paused to listen. He turned to the girl in gray. "What now?" She smiled gently and pointed toward the path behind the sundial. It hadn't been there yesterday. Or perhaps it had, hidden by the curling wisteria and the overgrown thyme. The path led downhill, beneath an archway of iron and mines. "Follow the ivy," she said. So he did. With each step, the air grew cooler, infused with the scent of old stone and pressed petals. The earth beneath him was soft, and the path became narrower, flanked by lanterns unlit but humming faintly with memory. At the end of the path stood a small wooden door. Simple, worn. He reached out and opened it. Inside was a library, but not one made of books. Instead, scrolls rusted in clay pots. Petals were pressed into thin sheets of glass, each etched with lines of time. Sand clocks hung on the walls, each turned at a different rhythm. And in the center, suspended by roots that draped from the ceiling, floated a mechanical globe. It ticked, softly, and each tick revealed a garden, not his but others. Some vast and overgrown, others tiny and precise. Some nestled in forests, others atop rooftops or hidden within alleyways in old cities. He stepped closer. The globe pulsed with a dim light, and slowly he saw something. The gardens were moving, not physically but through time. Their seasons unfolded. People entered. Seeds were planted. Clocks were wound. Flowers opened in silent unison. "These are gardens of memory," the girl whispered behind him. "Each one belongs to a clockmaker." He turned to her. "There are others?" She nodded. "Always have been, always will be. But only a few find the library." He looked around, suddenly aware of how many scrolls and petals surrounded him. "What are these?" he asked, reaching for one. She touched his hand. "Stories, moments, things too tender to be written in ink." He held the glass petal up to the lantern's glow. The etching on it showed a child kneeling in the dirt, planting a seed. The clock in the background ticked backward. A mother stood behind him, her hand over his heart. He blinked. "I remember this." The girl smiled. "Then it belongs here." She guided him to a wooden table. On it lay a parchment and a quill carved from honeysuckle wood. "Now," she said, "you write." He sat. The quill felt light in his fingers, not like a tool, but like a branch ready to bloom. And so the clockmaker wrote. He wrote not with haste, but with reverence. He wrote of time that curved like vines, of sorrow held like seeds, of love that returned, not as before, but gentler, deeper. He wrote of waiting, of listening, of a garden that ticked to the rhythm of memory. As he wrote, the globe overhead turned, soft petals fell, and somewhere in the library beneath the vines, the clocks aligned for the briefest of heartbeats, forward, backward, still. The candlelight in the underground library flickered low, casting long shadows that swayed like reeds in a pond. The clockmaker paused his writing, fingers resting gently on the soft parchment. The quill, warm now from his hand, seemed to thrum with the same quiet pulse that filled the chamber. Above the table, the globe of garden still turned slowly. Every so often it stopped, and every time it did, it revealed a new piece of another life. A woman in robes weaving thread beside a sundial. A boy spinning a copper gear into a locket. A monk whispering poetry to vines climbing a bell tower. Time in this place was no longer a line. It was a circle, a spiral, a flower. The girl in gray had wandered deeper into the chamber, her steps as soft as falling petals. She knelt before a shelf carved into the earth itself and pulled free a slender, dusted vial. Inside, a single seed, tiny, pale, and encased in soft light. She returned and set the vial gently before him. "This," she whispered, "was never meant to bloom in daylight." He tilted his head. "Why not?" "Because not all things need the sun," she said, her voice like wind through silk. "Some truths awaken only when it's quiet, when the world is asleep." He picked up the vial. The seed seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight, its surface etched with fine lines that reminded him of clock gears, or perhaps riverbeds seen from above. He asked, Where does it belong? She smiled, not with her mouth, but with something behind her eyes. You'll know, when you no longer seek the answer. He chuckled softly, the sound hushed by the moss-lined walls. That's cryptic, even for you. She only shrugged. The clockmaker stood, feeling a small pull in his chest, like something waiting. Not urgent, not loud, just persistent. I think I need to return, he said. She nodded. The garden remembers you. So he climbed the path again, this time with the seed tucked carefully inside his coat pocket. As he emerged from the ivy tunnel, he noticed how the light had changed. It was not morning nor afternoon. It was the silver hush of early night, where the sky is still velvet and the stars have only just begun to appear. The backward clock on the garden wall no longer ticked, but it pulsed, a slow rhythm like a heartbeat at rest. He wandered through the stone arch, past the koi pond mount, still and reflective, and returned to the center of the garden. He didn't need to ask where to go. His feet knew, his breath knew. He followed the winding path of crushed pearl shells until it opened into a small moonlit clearing. There, the earth was bare. No flowers, no weeds, just soft soil and the whisper of leaves overhead. He knelt, uncorked the vial, and planted the seed. He covered it gently, like tucking in a child, and then he waited. He did not ask it to grow. He did not hope or wish. He simply listened. To the crickets, to the moon, to the silence between his own breaths. And in that hush, the earth trembled, just slightly, as if the seed had sighed. Then, slowly and possibly, a sprout began to rise. Not fast, but purposefully. Its stem unfolded upward, silver and green, like a tendril of starlight chasing the sky. A bud appeared, round and soft, like a curled fist at peace. It glowed faintly, but it did not bloom, not yet. The clockmaker bowed his head, content. Some things, he knew now, bloom only for those willing to wait longer than a lifetime. He smiled to himself, the way you do when time itself offers a small, patient nod. And somewhere in the hidden places of the world, another garden opened its eyes. The seedling remained just as he had left it, tall enough to catch moonlight, still curled in sleep. The garden, too, seemed to hold its breath, as if respecting the sprout's slow decision to stay within the hush of becoming. The clockmaker no longer felt the need to wind anything. The sundial, the backward clock, even the tiny timepieces tucked into the mossy corners of his workshop, all ticked without his hand. Time had loosened its grip. The girl in gray visited often now. She no longer appeared suddenly, nor did she speak in riddles. She would simply sit with him, her eyes closed, listening to the wind. Sometimes they spoke. Most times they didn't need to. On the 7th evening after the seedling sprouted, they found something new. It was the sound of a bell that had not rung. They both heard it, not a chime, not a strike, but the ghost of a bell's echo, like a dream of sound remembered in silence. It came from the farthest edge of the garden, near the boundary where the trees grew thickest and the lantern light no longer reached. Curious, they walked side by side through the fern-lined trail. The path curved in unfamiliar ways, though the clockmaker was certain he had walked it before, and there it was. A stone bell tower, tiny, no taller than a child's treehouse, built from moss-covered bricks and crowned with a rusted iron bell that hung silent in the mist. The bell's rope lay coiled like a sleeping cat on the earth. No breeze stirred it, no ivy touched it. The girl placed her hand on the base of the tower. This wasn't always here. He frowned. What do you mean? Some places appear, she whispered, only when ready to remember them. She stepped back, her eyes gazing upward. Do you hear it now? He did. A vibration, faint, but unmistakable. The bell hadn't rung, but it was trying to. As he stared at the rope, he felt something settle in his chest. A memory not his own pressed gently against his ribs, like a feather wrapped in velvet. He stepped forward, and without pulling the rope, he placed one hand over his heart and bowed. The bell didn't move, but the air shifted. Something deep in the soil stirred, not roots, but stories. Things buried and soft over time. Regrets that no longer stung. Moments he had forgotten to grieve. And as he stood there, still bowed, a petal drifted from the sky, though no flower had bloomed above. It was white and nearly transparent, and carried on the slow spiral of dusk. He caught it. On the petal, almost invisible, was a tiny etching of a bell. Below it, a single word, later. He smiled. There was no need to ring it now. The girl in gray looked at him, her expression warm. You remembered, she said, and he did. He remembered the bell tower in the corner of his childhood garden, the one his grandfather built but never finished. How he, as a child, would sit inside it, pretending to announce the turning of hours with a wooden spoon and a brass bowl. He remembered wishing once for time to stop when his mother fell ill, wishing the bell would freeze the moment she smiled forever, but the bell never rang, and she passed. Now, standing in this dream of a garden, he no longer wished for frozen time. He wished only to walk through it gently. The petal in his hand dissolved, not with sadness, but peace. The girl took his hand. There are more places waiting, she said. And together they left the bell tower behind, not abandoned, but honored. It would ring one day, just not yet. Morning, if one could call it that, arrived not with sunlight, but with the shimmer of soft gray mist curling over the garden walls. The air held the scent of cedar and old parchment, like a forgotten library warmed by breath alone. The clockmaker sat beneath a low, blooming tree with white blossoms that opened only in silence. In his lap, nestled in a velvet pouch, rested a peculiar timepiece, one he had never built, yet it bore his signature on the underside. It was a pocket watch, but its hands moved backward. Not quickly, not jarringly, but with slow, measured resolve. It ticked with the calm certainty of a river flowing back to its source. The girl in gray arrived without footsteps, as always, her eyes flicking to the watch with quiet recognition. You found it, she whispered. He looked up. Did I lose it? She knelt beside him, placing her fingertips gently against the closed cover. Not lost, only waiting to be remembered. He opened the lid. Inside, the numbers were reversed, the 12 at the bottom, the 6 at the top. The second hand moved counterclockwise, gracefully ticking down moments, as if unspooling a story that had already been told. He asked, what does it count? Not minutes, she replied softly. Not hours. Then what? She placed her hand over his heart. Regrets, unsaid words, second chances. The clockmaker stared at the watch, feeling the rhythm beneath his ribs sync with its backward pulse. He remembered how he had once crafted a similar piece, intended to be gifted to someone he never quite found the words for. A friend lost in war, a brother who had gone to sea. That watch had never been finished, but this one, it was complete. On the inner lid, in faint etching, were 4 words, You were always enough. He blinked slowly, a tear forming not from sadness but relief. A warmth spread through him, not hot but steady, like the glow from coals left smoldering in the hearth long after the fire has gone out. May I keep it? He asked, voice barely more than breath. The girl in gray smiled. It was always yours. He slipped the watch into his coat, close to his heart, where its ticking became an echo of his own breath. In the distance, a low chime sounded not from the bell tower, but deeper within the garden. The girl stood, offering her hand. Come, the magnolia pool is waking. He followed her down a path lined with pressed copper leaves, their edges curling like old letters. The mist parted to reveal a wide, circular pond, framed by ancient magnolia trees in full bloom. Their petals floated on the surface like scattered dreams. At the center of the pool, time slowed even more. Ripples moved in reverse, A fish leapt and landed where it had begun. A petal touched the surface and rose instead of sinking. The girl whispered, "This is where the garden remembers the things we tried to forget." He stood at the water's edge, watching the past unfurl in gentle loops, moments of joy, moments of longing, all woven into the rippling reflection. The backward watch ticked softly in his pocket, in harmony with the pond's gentle undoing. And for a while they said nothing, just listened and remembered. The surface of the magnolia pool shimmered like glass dusted with powdered moonlight. Each floating blossom turned slowly, as if stirred by invisible hands. Around its banks, lanterns hung from silver-threaded branches, unlit but humming softly, as though they remembered fire. The clockmaker knelt at the edge, his fingertips barely brushing the water. It felt warm, not with heat, but with recognition, as though the pond knew his touch from long ago. The girl in gray stood behind him, quiet as breath. "This is the hour of forgetting," she said. The name made his chest ache in a way he couldn't name. She continued, "Not all memories are meant to be carried forever. Some weigh down the roots, others keep us from blooming." He looked into the mirrored surface and saw not himself, but a younger version. The boy who first learned to tinker, the boy who watched his father. S hands fix broken clocks while never quite knowing how to fix broken words. Beside that image appeared another, his mother, humming as she trimmed roses in a sunlit courtyard. He remembered her laughter, the way it had softened the sharp corners of his childhood. Then silence, a long ago argument, a slammed door, and her final goodbye unsaid, sealed behind time. He lowered his head. "I never said I was sorry." "You don't have to," the girl whispered. "This garden remembers you loved her." A blossom detached from the tree and floated toward the center of the pool, its path slow and deliberate. As it reached the middle, the entire pond rippled outward, not like water reacting to motion, but like time rippling around a choice. "She forgives you," the girl said softly. "How can you know that?" "She left you this garden." He turned to her, startled. "She my mother?" She nodded. "She was one of us, a gardener of time. Before you, before me." He stared at the magnolia trees, now suddenly alive with memories, her laughter hidden in their leaves, her gentleness rooted in their branches. A soft wind blew, and the scent of rosewater and sandalwood filled the air. "She left you this place," the girl repeated, "so you would never forget, and so one day you might choose to let go." He knelt longer beside the pool, watching memories play gently in reverse, an embrace he didn't remember asking for. The day he received his first gears and tools, the look of pride in her eyes, and then one by one the images faded. Not erased, just softened. Like pencil sketches tucked in a drawer. He dipped his hands into the water and let it wash over his wrists, cool and slow. The pocket watch in his coat stopped ticking. He looked at the girl. It stopped. She smiled. "Because you've remembered what needed remembering." She reached into the folds of her robe and handed him a petal-deep pink, shaped like a heart. "Place this in the soil where the seedling grew," she said. "It's ready now." He rose without speaking, not because he lacked words, but because stillness had become the most honest language. They walked side by side again, through the copper leaf path toward the seedling. When they arrived, the plant had changed. It was no longer a sprout. It was a tree young but tall, with a single blossom at its crown, and beneath it, time had gone still. He placed the petal gently at the base, and for a moment, the world exhaled. As the petal nestled into the soil, a hush spread through the garden, deeper than silence, older than words. Even the wind paused, as though the breath of the world held still to witness. The young tree shimmered with a faint golden glow. Its bark, once smooth and pale, began to deepen in tone, curling with etchings like vines. But these weren't natural patterns, they were markings, delicate as calligraphy, forming shapes not unlike the hands of a clock, spiraling outward. "They're not roots," the clockmaker whispered, crouching low to see. "No," said the girl in gray beside him, "they're stories. Everything the seedling has listened to since you first arrived." He reached forward, tracing one of the curling symbols. It warmed beneath his fingertips. A memory bloomed behind his eyes, the sound of rain tapping on a glass window the night he first held a pocket watch. Cradled like something sacred, the girl placed her hand on the tree. "This garden doesn't grow with water alone. It grows with listening." As if in response, the tree trembled ever so slightly, its lone blossom turning toward them like a face seeking light. From the branch, a droplet fell not of water, but of light. It landed on the clockmaker's hand and soaked in without a trace, leaving behind only warmth and a soft inner hum. The girl led him around the tree to its far side, where a wooden bench, carved from the same type of magnolia, awaited. Its back was shaped like the moon, its surface worn smooth by time. He sat, letting his spine press into the moon's curve, feeling its quiet strength. She joined him. For a time, they simply watched the tree. Its blossom opened wider, revealing a tiny hourglass at its center, so small it might be overlooked, yet perfectly formed. Sam moved inside, but not from top to bottom. It floated in suspension, each grain moving with thoughtful stillness. "What is it measuring?" he asked softly. "The listening," she replied. "Not of sound, but of silence." He leaned back, letting his eyes close, tuning into the hush. In that stillness, he heard things he hadn't known he carried. The whisper of his mother's lullaby, the tick of a forgotten clock in his childhood bedroom, the laughter of someone he once loved, who had left with no goodbye, and then nothing. A gentle, spacious nothing that asks for nothing, the kind of nothing that invites rest. The girl in gray placed a hand over his heart again. "You're beginning to remember how to sleep," she whispered. He smiled faintly, eyes still closed. "I've forgotten." "We all do," she murmured. A breeze moved through the tree, soft as breath, and the blossom gently released another droplet of light. It hovered for a moment, then drifted toward the clockmaker's shoulder, resting there like a firefly, pulsing once before disappearing. From the branches above, a soft hum began. Not a tune, not a voice, just presence. The garden itself seemed to settle. "You can stay here," she said quietly, "as long as you like." He opened his eyes and looked around, not with urgency, but with calm recognition. The tree, the pond, the path of copper leaves, all now familiar, all now his. "I think I will." They sat in companionable silence as the tree continued to bloom, one blossom, then another, each glowing gently before opening, revealing more tiny hourglasses, each still, each waiting. The garden was listening, and so was he. That evening, the clockmaker awoke not with a jolt, but with the soft sensation of having never truly left sleep. The garden had no clear boundary between waking and dreaming, just layers of quiet. He stirred on the moon-shaped bench as the girl in gray approached, holding something wrapped in silk. "The bell is ready," she said, her voice even softer than before. He sat upright, rubbing his hands gently together. "The one that doesn't ring?" She nodded. "It listens instead." From the folds of silk, she revealed a small bronze bell. Its surface bore a greenish patina, ancient and gentle. There was no clapper inside, nothing to strike, nothing to stir vibrations, and yet it felt alive. He took it carefully. The metal was warm, as if it had been held by sunlight. "What do I do with it?" he asked. She tilted her head toward the center of the garden. "It's time to visit the Chamber of Echoes." They walked slowly together, following a winding path that dipped beneath hanging vines and over small stone bridges. Every step felt softer than the last, as if even the ground had grown sleepy. Finally, they reached a low wooden archway framed with jasmine and carved symbols. Beyond it, a round structure nestled into the earth like a resting tortoise, its door made of woven willow branches. This place was built for sound, the girl whispered, that now it holds only silence. Inside, the chamber was round, its walls made of smooth river stones. The ceiling arched like the inside of a seashell, gathering every breath and exhale into a soft, invisible swirl. At the center sat a single cushion, and beside it a wooden post simple, unadorned, carved only with the shape of a sleeping eye. The clockmaker stepped inside, his feet making no sound. He sat on the cushion, placed the bell in his lap, and rested his hands on either side. The girl stood by the doorway, watching. "Here," she said, "you don't ring the bell. You remember with it." He closed his eyes. The silence was thick, velvet dark, and warm. And then he heard it. A memory, not with his ears, but in the marrow of his chest. His father's voice, low and steady, saying, "You don't need to fix everything." Then the creak of his old attic chair. Then the soft squeak of gears he'd made with his first toolkit. No sound was heard, yet all was felt. He held the bell tighter, and with a breath, placed it gently atop the wooden post. For a long while, he said nothing. The girl moved to stand beside him, and in the silence, he whispered, "I was always trying to make time behave." Her voice answered, just above the hush. "But time doesn't need fixing, only listening." The bell did not chime, but pulsed, not with noise, but with memory. He stood slowly, placing a hand over his heart. "I think I'm beginning to understand the garden." The girl offered her arm again. "Then you're ready for the gallery?" He looked at her, slightly puzzled. "Gallery?" She smiled. "Of unfinished moments." And with that, they left the chamber behind quiet, but echoing softly within them. They walked in near silence, save for the hush of moss beneath their feet and the rustle of lantern leaves high above. The garden deepened into hues of silver and deep plum, and the air grew still, almost reverent. Ahead stood a series of arches woven from willow and honeysuckle, each draped with flowing silks and colors that didn't quite exist in the waking world shades of memory, perhaps, or dreams yet to be dreamed. "This is the gallery," the girl in gray said softly, "where moments that never ended still linger." The clockmaker stepped through the first arch, and a hush settled over him like a comforting shawl. Inside, the gallery stretched wider than it seemed from the outside. It wasn't filled with paintings or sculptures, but something quieter suspended in the air like wisps of mist or flickers of time. Scenes paused mid-motion, unspoken thoughts hanging like dewdrops, gestures unfinished. The first image hovered near his shoulder, a boy's hand reaching for another's but never quite grasping it. The clockmaker stepped closer and the mist shimmered, whispering a soundless feeling. He didn't recognize the faces, but he understood the ache. The pause, the hesitation before love becomes courage. "Why are they here?" he asked. "These are the moments that weren't brave enough to finish," the girl answered, "but they still deserve to be remembered." He moved slowly through the gallery. One scene showed a woman on a train platform, a letter in her coat pocket. Her lips parted as though to call out, but the train was already pulling away. Another showed an old man sitting by a window, a cup of tea growing cold. He looked toward the door as if waiting for someone, but the door never opened. "These are beautiful," the clockmaker whispered. "They're tender," said the girl. "Moments the world might have forgotten, but the garden remembers." He paused before a flicker that stopped him completely. A boy, maybe 10 years old, sat beside a cracked sundial. His face was tilted up toward the sky, eyes searching. In his lap, a broken pocket watch. And beside him, empty space. "That's me," the clockmaker murmured. "The day my father didn't come back." The air grew still around him. "I waited," he said softly, I waited all afternoon. The girl stepped beside him, and this part of you still waits. He knelt beside the memory. The boy's eyes flickered as though he sensed someone watching through the years. The clockmaker reached out not to fix the moment, not to change it, just to witness it. You were so brave, he said to his younger self. You kept listening even when the ticking stopped. And slowly, the scene shifted, not to an ending, but to peace. The image dissolved into soft mist, and from that place, a single feather floated down, a gift from the memory itself. He caught it gently. Does every moment here get to finish? He asked. Not always, the girl replied, but sometimes they just want to be seen. He nodded and tucked the feather into his coat pocket. They continued through the gallery. A flicker showed a man on one knee, holding a ring that would never be offered. Another showed a child alone in a library, a question on her lips no one ever answered. Each moment was a sigh, a story with its last line left blank. The clockmaker began to understand. Time wasn't just years and minutes. It was full of these pauses, these tender silences that made room for hope, for grief, for the soft ache of being human. As they reached the last arch, the girl turned to him. You've carried so many unfinished things. He nodded. I thought I had to complete them. No, she said gently. You only had to remember. They mattered. He exhaled, long and quiet. Behind them, the gallery faded into mist, but the warmth of the moments remained like embers in his chest. And somewhere in the trees above, a bell that did not ring whispered its approval. As they stepped beyond the final arch of the gallery, a new path wound beneath them, pale stone dusted with fallen petals, each petal bearing a single letter. The moon overhead had shifted again, now shaped like a closed eye, dreaming high above. Where are we going now? The clockmaker asked, his voice low with wonder. The girl in gray looked ahead, to the orchard of names. Not the ones we speak, but the ones we've forgotten. The path led through a grove of slender trees, their trunks a smooth ivory gray. Each branch bore fruit not of apples or oranges, but small glowing orbs, each warm with a soft light, each faintly pulsing like a heartbeat. The air smelled of rain-soaked parchment and wild jasmine. What are these? The clockmaker asked, running a gentle finger along one of the orbs. Names, she whispered. Given, spoken, forgotten, and remembered again. He turned to her. I don't understand. She plucked one of the fruits and cradled it in her hands. Every soul carries many names across time. Some they inherit, some they earn, some they leave behind like footprints. She held the fruit up to his ear, and softly it whispered. A name, not one he had heard before. Not one he would know how to spell. But something in it made his chest swell, as if a window had been opened inside his heart. It's mine, he said, eyes wide. She nodded. One of them. This one you left behind when you chose to become what others needed. The trees rustled around them, not with wind, but with breath. Each glowing fruit murmured to itself, 1,000 names lost to time. Childhood names, secret names, nicknames spoken once then, never again. Some were never uttered at all, just felt. I thought I only had one name, he said. She smiled. That's what the ticking world tells us, but the garden, it remembers them all. They walked slowly beneath the trees, and the clockmaker noticed a small wooden bench beneath a bowing branch. Carved along the backrest were rows and rows of unreadable script, not in any language he recognized, but somehow familiar. What does it say? It's a lullaby, she said, sung in the names of those who never heard theirs spoken kindly. He sat on the bench, and it creaked not with age, but with recognition. Around him, the glowing fruits dimmed slightly, as if listening. He placed a hand over his chest. Sometimes I feel like I forgot who I was a long time ago, he whispered. And sometimes, she said, sitting beside him, we must forget in order to become. They sat in silence, and above them, the moon opened one eye just a little. Just enough to spill a silver beam through the orchard, lighting a single fruit on the farthest tree. The girls stood. That one is ready. They walked together, the sound of their steps soft as snowflakes. The fruit hung low, and as the clockmaker reached for it, he heard the name inside it speak, not to his ears, but to his bones. It was the name he would need tomorrow, the name he hadn't yet lived into. He pressed it gently to his forehead, and in that moment, he remembered not just who he had been, but who he still could be. The fruit dissolved into light. The name stayed behind, tucked quietly into the space just behind his heart. They left the orchard slowly, the trees nodding in soft farewell, and the names continued to sleep. But not alone. Beyond the orchard, the path narrowed into a tunnel of drooping wisteria, their blossoms like lilac teardrops brushing gently against the clockmaker's shoulders. The world grew quieter with each step, so quiet he could hear the shifting of his own heartbeat, slow and steady. The girl in gray touched his arm and whispered, "This way. Time here moves differently, as it was once imagined." The wisteria parted, revealing a circular room carved entirely from pale stone. It wasn't built, it had grown that way, like the garden's own idea of a sanctuary. Around the room stood dozens, perhaps hundreds of clocks, but none of them ticked. They were silent, tall grandfather clocks with curled iron faces, tiny sundials resting on shelves of driftwood, pocket watches nestled like eggs in velvet hollows, and curious orbs that glowed where numbers should be. Some had no hands. Some had no numbers. Some had faces that blinked like owl eyes. The air shimmered with stillness. "Why don't they move?" the clockmaker asked, breath hushed in awe. "They once did," the girl said, "but they chose to rest." He stepped into the chamber, his footfall swallowed by silence. A clock near the door caught his attention, a small one, shaped like a bellflower. He peered inside its glass dome. Instead of gears, it held a swirl of petals suspended in time, as if someone had frozen a gentle breeze. "This is the first time I ever lost track of time," he murmured, recognizing it without knowing how. "I was 6. I watched a butterfly land on my knee and forgot everything else." The girl nodded. That moment was sacred. The clock knew. He turned to another clock with a cracked glass face, its hour hand missing. Inside, a faint reflection of a rainy window. "That's the day I let someone down," he said, voice catching slightly. The girl placed a hand on his shoulder. "Even broken time is remembered here. Nothing is discarded." He wandered deeper. Each clock seemed to pulse with a memory, some joyful, some aching, some weightless and ephemeral. One ticked only when he smiled. Another glowed faintly when he breathed deeply. And one, a great brass clock tucked into a stone alcove, held a pendulum made from a single raindrop, swinging so slowly that it seemed not to move at all. "These clocks don't measure time," he said finally. "They feel it." The girl smiled. "Time, after all, isn't only motion, it's meaning." In the center of the room stood a table made of smooth rosewood. Upon it lay a single clock, a delicate timepiece carved from sandalwood and moonstone, its hands gently curled inward, sleeping. "This one belongs to you," she said softly. He picked it up, and for a moment, it was as if the garden itself paused to listen. A soft sound emerged, not a ticking, but a whisper. A memory too quiet to disturb the world. A moment too precious to forget. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, he remembered everything he had once thought lost, the silence between words with someone he once loved, the stillness after a promise made, the hush of holding his breath, not from fear, but from wonder. The clock rested in his palm like a curled leaf. "What do I do with it?" he asked. "You already have," the girl said. "You've held time gently. That's all it ever needed." He placed the clock back on the table. It glowed once, faintly, and then went still again. He turned slowly, taking in the room. I thought clocks were only meant to measure time, he said. She smiled, walking beside him as they left the chamber. Some do, but others simply honor it. And as the door of wisteria blossoms closed behind them, the silent clocks listened with soft pride, each one holding time not by counting it, but by keeping it safe. The path following the chamber of quiet clocks felt lighter somehow, as if each step lifted the weight of hours from the clockmaker's shoulders. The sky above was now a soft lavender gray, dotted with the faintest stars like pinpricks in silk, gently breathing. As they walked, the girl in gray said very little. Her silence wasn't absence, but invitation. Soon, the trail brought them to a small valley tucked beneath a veil of mist. The moment they stepped through, the air changed. It hummed, a gentle melodic vibration like lullabies drifting on wind, as though the valley itself was singing, or remembering how. The clockmaker tilted his head, listening. He could hear faint voices, not words, but feelings, the echo of his mother's laughter as she stirred tea, the rhythm of rain on a tin roof when he was too young to be afraid, the whisper of a promise he had made beneath a willow tree. "What is this place?" he asked. The girl in gray stopped at a small stone archway carved with vines. "This," she said softly, "is where echoes go when they're no longer needed in the world, but too loved to vanish." The garden beyond was gentle. Smooth moss cradled the earth. Tall ferns swayed as if sighing, and nestled between the roots of trees were small, bell-shaped chambers, open like seashells. From each one came a sound, not loud, not constant, but tender. A child's first giggle, the soft exhale of a loved one falling asleep beside you, the hush that follows a long-awaited yes. The clockmaker's eyes grew wide as he walked among them. "These are all sounds. Sounds the world forgot," she said, but the heart never did. He knelt beside one of the bell chambers and listened. Inside it, a lullaby hummed, familiar and trembling with memory. He couldn't place it, but it made his throat ache in the way that only home could. "I've heard this," he said. "You have," she nodded. "Long ago. Someone sang it when they thought you were asleep." A hush fell between them, like a blanket of snow. "And now it lives here?" he asked, touching the rim of the chamber. "It sleeps here," she replied, "every time it's remembered. It stirs." He wandered on. Some echoes were playful, the pop of a cork, the creak of a door during hide-and-seek, a burst of fireworks far in the distance. Others were reverent, church bells muffled by snow, a whispered prayer spoken alone, a name cried into a storm. One chamber held nothing but the soft clink of teacups, the clatter of spoons against porcelain, and the warm hum of two people talking about everything and nothing. The clockmaker smiled. "It's like the soundtrack of a soul," she nodded. A wind stirred. It didn't blow through the valley, it moved within it, as though the air was breathing in. And then the echoes all stilled. One by one, the chambers hushed. The clockmaker turned. "What's happening?" The girl in gray tilted her head. "The garden is listening." "To what?" She placed a hand to her heart. "To you." He closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He let his breath carry out the sound of the memory he had just found again, a single quiet moment of sitting on a windowsill, watching dusk settle over rooftops and feeling perfectly at peace. The garden heard it. A new chamber stirred open in the moss behind them, and from within a sound took root. The sound of stillness wrapped in warmth. He turned to her. "Did I just—" She smiled. "You remembered something worth echoing." As they left the valley, the mist closed gently behind them, like a curtain drawn at the end of a symphony. The sounds would remain, sleeping, waiting for the next listener. The mist behind them faded like breath on glass, and ahead, a narrow trail of polished black stone emerged, leading to a circular glade framed by low archways. In the center stood a peculiar dome made of copper and glass. faintly glowing from within, as if lit by candlelight that had never burned out. As they entered, the door swung open with a musical chime, not a mechanical bell, but the soft tone of wind through hollow reeds. Inside, silence held its breath. 100 instruments filled the space, but not one was being played. A harp of silver string, a cello with a rosewood spine, drums shaped like sunflowers, and flutes that resembled hollow branches. Each one rested in stillness, but none felt abandoned. The clockmaker stepped forward. "What is this place?" She smiled faintly. "This is where the garden keeps all the sounds never heard, the songs unplayed, the words unsaid, the hum of thoughts too gentle to become voice." He ran his fingers along the edge of a curved shell horn. It vibrated beneath his touch just once, like a sleeping creature stirring in a dream. "These instruments, are they waiting for someone to play them?" "No," she said softly. "They're listening." He paused, confused. She approached a harp shaped like an unfolding leaf and placed her hand on its frame. The strings moved on their own, ever so slightly, plucking out 3 trembling notes that hung in the air like perfume. "They listen to your breath, your heartbeat, the weight of your footsteps. They don't require melody, they remember presence." The clockmaker looked around. "Do they remember mine?" She nodded. "There's one here that's only ever echoed your silence." He followed her past a violin shaped from smoky crystal, past wooden chimes that turned with no breeze, until they stopped before a piano-like structure. It wasn't quite a piano, its keys were made from river stones, smooth and cool. The seat looked worn, though untouched. He sat gently. The moment he did, a note played, not one he touched, but one the instrument chose. Low, soft, and warm, like the hush before snowfall. Another followed, higher this time, almost questioning. He placed his hands on the stones, not pressing, just resting. A third note joined, unprompted. "Why does it play without me?" he asked. "It remembers the parts of you you never gave away," she whispered. "The music you carried in silence, the lullabies you hummed to no one, the sounds you dreamed but never dared make real." A melody began to form, weaving from the instruments surrounding them, not in rhythm, not in harmony, but in echo, like scattered reflections of a voice never heard aloud. The clockmaker closed his eyes. The room didn't fill with noise. It filled with knowing. And in that moment, he realized he had never been voiceless. The garden had always been listening. He stood, and every instrument fell back into hush. And yet he could still hear the song. The path from the listening room curled upward through a tunnel of whispering bamboo, each stalk leaning just slightly, as though bowing in slow recognition. The clockmaker's shoes crunched gently on crushed shells, soft and pale underfoot. The girl in gray said nothing, but her smile carried a hush that was fuller than words. At the top of the rise stood a conservatory made entirely of curved glass, some panels clouded, others shimmering like ice. From within came a pale light, steady and golden, like morning sunlight that had been slowed down. Inside, the air was cool and reverent. Rows upon rows of glass cases stretched outward in elegant arcs, each cradling a moment suspended in time. A paper crane caught mid-fold, its crease unfinished. A candle flame frozen into a delicate teardrop of fire. A teacup mid-splash, with droplets hanging in perfect suspension. "They are memories," the girl said, voice softer than breath. "But not as you remember them, as they felt." The clockmaker approached a case shaped like a tear. Inside floated a single button. He blinked. "This was from my father's coat?" She nodded. "The moment you picked it up off the floor, you thought no one saw. But time did." He looked at another. It held a fragment of cherry blossom, just barely separated from its branch. "The moment I understood what loss was," he whispered. "They aren't moments of greatness," she said. "They're moments of awakening." He walked slowly between the rows, each glass case offering a memory too quiet to have ever been spoken aloud. The sound of snow melting, the feel of a book. Closed after the last page, the ache of watching someone walk away without turning back. Then he stopped. A case stood apart from the others, larger, framed in bronze. Inside was a memory he hadn't known he'd lost. A small wooden bird, hand-carved and painted blue. His own hands, smaller, trembling, offering it to someone who never reached back. He touched the glass, and for a moment, the conservatory dimmed. Not in shadow, but in softness. As if the garden had drawn a curtain over the moment to protect it. "You were kind," she said, stepping beside him. "Even when kindness wasn't returned." He said nothing, but his breath grew slower. He had not remembered the bird, but the garden had, and now so had he. Around them, the frozen moments did not press or clamor. They shimmered like the surface of a still lake, reflecting not the past, but the tenderness hidden within it. He turned to her. "Do they ever thaw?" She shook her head. "No, they're not meant to live again. Only to rest?" As they stepped back into the evening air, the light inside the conservatory did not fade. It simply waited, holding the stories that had never been told, in the silence they deserved. Beyond the conservatory, the garden narrowed into a quiet, winding path, flanked by stone lanterns half buried in moss. The light here was different, more fluid, as though the sky itself had slowed to a gentle ripple. And somewhere ahead there was the faint sound of water, lapping gently, like sleep licking at the edges of thought. They came upon a river, but it was unlike any river the Clockmaker had seen. Its waters shimmered in hues of deep blue and soft gold, and drifted not with gravity, but with feeling, gliding slowly in whichever direction the heart needed. At the edge was a dock made of lotus wood, and tied to it, a single, flat-bottomed boat lined with cushions of velvet moss. "This is the river of untold dreams," the girl said quietly. "Not the dreams you chase in sleep, but the ones you never let yourself imagine." The Clockmaker stepped closer. The river gave off no cold, no heat, only stillness. She helped him into the boat. It didn't rock or dip. It accepted his weight like an old friend's embrace. She stepped in behind him. No paddles, no sails, and yet the boat began to move. The current knew the way. As they drifted, the river began to change. Shapes began to form in the water like reflections of dreams that never took breath. A bakery with windows that glowed in twilight. A cabin in a forest filled with books and birdsong. A workshop where time stood still and every hour was spent making toys for children he never had. "These are the lives I never lived," he whispered. "They're not regrets," she said, her voice like falling petals. "They're echoes. Gentle things your heart whispered once and tucked away." The boat passed beneath a willow tree whose branches kissed the water. Each leaf it touched left a memory, a child's laughter, a song half sung, a scent he couldn't quite name. He leaned over the edge and saw one more reflection, himself. Not younger, not older, but content. "I look different," he said. "No," she replied. "You look seen." A warm breeze stirred the hem of his coat. The sky above was turning softly lavender, like a bruise fading into peace. "Do these dreams ever return?" he asked. "They never leave," she said, "but sometimes knowing they were possible is enough." The boat began to slow. The dock ahead was lit by paper lanterns. Their drift was nearly done, and yet the Clockmaker felt no loss, only fullness, like a letter at last delivered. He stepped ashore. The girl followed. Behind them, the river kept drifting quiet and unhurried, carrying the dreams of those who had never dared to sleep deeply enough to see them. The Clockmaker and the girl stepped from the soft earth of the riverbank onto a smooth, circular stone path that spiraled inward like the shell of a sleeping snail. All around them, suspended from branches, sat small wooden clocks, each shaped uniquely, each gently swaying on invisible threads. There were cuckoo clocks with their doors closed tight, pocket watches frozen mid-tick, hourglasses turned on their sides, and grandfather clocks that leaned ever so slightly, as if listening. The air buzzed not with sound, but with potential. "Why are they all still?" he asked. She walked ahead and paused beneath one shaped like a crescent moon. Its pendulum hung motionless, yet its casing felt warm. "These clocks do not tell time," she said softly. "They remember it?" He furrowed his brow. "Remember?" She turned to face him fully, her eyes quiet and wide. "Every moment you tried to pause, every heartbeat you wished you could hold." The garden caught them. She reached for a delicate clock carved from ivory and pressed a finger to its glass. A low chime rang out. Not loud, not piercing, just one single tone. It was the sound of a memory. The moment he stood in the doorway of his mother's house for the last time, coat too small, eyes full of something he couldn't name, then bittersweet knowing, he gasped, "How does it know?" She stepped away. "You never spoke it aloud?" But time is not deaf. It listens even when you do not. The spiraling path drew them inward, deeper into the heart of the hall. The further they walked, the older the clocks became. Some were carved from driftwood and stone, others held together with bone and string. And at the very center stood a single, unmarked clock. No hands. No pendulum. Just a surface smooth and dark like a still lake beneath stars. The girl knelt beside it. "This is the clock that holds your forgotten time." He knelt too, unsure, his breath slowing of its own accord. "You mean the time I've lost?" "No," she whispered. "The time you gave away." He looked down at the dark face. It didn't reflect him. It didn't move. But slowly, softly, he felt something stir within his chest. Warmth, not like fire, like returning. He laid his hand on the surface. It vibrated once, then again. And for the first time in decades, he felt the exact rhythm of his own heartbeat years of it, gentle and golden, rising through the silence like sun through fog. The clock didn't chime, it exhaled. And the garden exhaled with it. He stood, but the weight he always carried did not follow. It had been returned to the moment it came from. The hall of quiet clocks remained behind as they walked away, but the rhythm stayed within him, a ticking not of hours, but of presence. The path led them beneath an arch of vines strung with dried boughs, their soft chimes stirred only by memory. Beyond it, the air grew sweeter tinged with the scent of orange blossom, warm earth, and something more elusive, like the trace of a promise once spoken in the hush before sleep. The orchard stretched ahead, rows upon rows of slender trees with bark like parchment and leaves of soft copper. From every branch hung fruit of unusual shape and color, some small and pale, others heavy with unseen weight. These trees, the girl whispered, grew from promises left unkept. The clockmaker's breath caught. "Not broken," she clarified gently, "simply unfinished." He walked slowly through the rows, his fingers brushing against a round, silver-skinned fruit. A name stirred in the back of his mind, Margot. He had promised her a letter, a goodbye that never came. The fruit pulsed once, then dimmed. "They remember us?" he asked. "They remember your intention," she said, kneeling beside a tree whose trunk bore etchings like old handwriting. "Not all promises are failures. Some simply needed more time than you had." He crouched, running his hand along a tree that felt almost warm. A fruit here glowed faintly gold, shaped like a curled hand reaching up. "I told my brother I'd visit the lake with him before winter," he murmured. "I never did." He looked up. The tree wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It stood still, patient. The promise had not spoiled. "You may finish them here," she said, "or you may simply acknowledge them." "How?" he asked. She smiled. "By remembering. By saying them aloud. and by forgiving the you who meant well. The orchard stirred. A wind passed through that carried no cold, only resolution. The clockmaker turned and began to speak, not loudly, but gently, with care. Names, hopes, apologies, little things that had once mattered greatly and then been tucked away like notes in an old coat pocket. With each word, a tree bowed slightly. Some fruit ripened, some vanished. Others stayed just the same, as if saying, "It is enough." He stood in the center of the orchard, and the ground beneath him felt firm, solid in a way time rarely was. "You never forget a promise," he said, voice quiet. "No," she answered, "but you can let it rest." They moved on in silence, the path ahead lit now with soft lanterns shaped like folded paper. Behind them, the orchard stood not in judgment, but in peace. And the air smelled gently of orange blossom and closure. The winding path narrowed again, drawing the clockmaker and the girl into a low archway framed with ivy and tiny hanging bells. As they stepped through, the air shifted, not colder, not warmer, but fuller, like stepping into a room that had been waiting to exhale. Inside, the walls were soft with moss and memory. The room had no ceiling, only a sky of deep twilight where stars twinkled like candlelight. In the center stood a great round table carved from petrified wood. Around it, empty chairs, each one mismatched, each one carefully placed. And floating above each chair, like a memory caught mid-breath, was laughter. Not just sound, something more, like warm wind and music. "Where are we?" the clockmaker whispered. "The room of echoing laughter," the girl replied, her voice hushed and reverent. "This is where your joy lives." He looked around slowly, eyes wide. Each bubble of laughter was different. A boy's bright giggle as he chased his shadow. A woman's amused chuckle at a joke no one else heard. His own once, in a moment, he barely remembered, laughing at a clock that ticked backward just for fun. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't startle. It shimmered. "They stayed?" he asked. "They were never gone," she said softly. "Laughter leaves a trace. It roots itself in places deeper than time." He walked to one of the chairs and touched the armrest. A sudden warmth like old sunlight pressed into wood. "Here," she said, motioning for him to sit. He did, and as he settled in, something remarkable happened. One by one, the chairs around the table began to fill, not with people, not quite, but with a sense of them, a coat left behind, a scent in the air, the shadow of someone standing just behind his shoulder, not intruding, only present, his father's humming, the raucous giggle of his best friend from childhood, the quiet snort of a student who never quite got the mechanics right, but always made him smile. The air was full of them, not heavy but buoyant. And in that room, for just a little while, time let go of its ticking. No rush, no regret, just joy suspended. "I forgot how much of it there was," he murmured. "Because you stopped listening," she replied. The room brightened, not with light, but with levity. Even grief, it seemed, had left laughter behind like flowers pressed in a book. As the laughter floated upward into the starry dome, it became song melodic, wordless, soft enough to cradle sleep. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him. Not everything needed to be remembered clearly to be cherished. Some joy is best felt as a whisper. And in that chair, surrounded by the hush of mirth and memory, the clockmaker felt something deep within him unlock. Not with a click, but with a smile. They emerged from the orchard's warm glow into a clearing where silence pressed in like velvet. Ahead stood a narrow tower, impossibly tall, yet delicate, its stone etched with spiraling hour marks that shimmered faintly under the garden's starlit sky. "The Tower of Regretful Hours," the girl said softly, as if naming it too loudly might disturb its fragile stillness. He hesitated. "Why bring me here?" "Because you have climbed it many times, in your mind," she replied, "but always alone." They stepped inside. The interior was spiraling, endless steps climbing into darkness. Along the walls, tiny clocks marked moments of sorrow, each frozen at a time the clockmaker knew too well. The minute he turned away, the hour he let silence win. The morning he chose duty over joy, each tick a decision, each pause a wait, but this time he was not alone. As they climbed, the girl held a lantern, its light casting golden threads on the cold stone. With each step, a frozen clock stirred. Not to restart time, but to forgive it. Halfway up, he paused. One clock showed 3:04. A sliver of a moment. The last time he saw her at the train station, when he said, "Safe travels," instead of "Please stay," he reached for the clock. The hands trembled. "Can I change it?" He asked. "No," the girl whispered, "but you can hold it. Let it breathe." And as he cupped the clock, it let out a tiny sigh, like a teardrop turned into mist. They continued, higher, until the steps opened to a round chamber at the top. The ceiling was glass, and above it, the stars turned slowly, like the inside of a pocket watch. In the center, a great wheel spun lazily. Around it, small figurines stood in frozen poses, moments he'd always wished to erase, and yet here they were, not cruel. "Just still. This is your reckoning," the girl said. "But also your release. How?" She knelt beside the wheel and pointed to a lever carved from bone and brass. "Spin it," she said. "Let regret move." He hesitated, and then he did. The wheel spun slowly at first, then faster. The figurines began to shift, not disappear, but soften. A sorrowful man turned slightly toward joy. A broken conversation tilted toward laughter. A quiet silence became a necessary rest. Regret was never erased, but it transformed. The tower pulsed with that quiet truth. "You are not the sum of your regrets," she said, rising. "You are the garden that grew from them." He let that settle deep into the space behind his heart. And when he descended the tower, the clocks along the stairwell were no longer frozen. They ticked gently, not to count time, but to remind him it was never too late to feel it. At the edge of the garden, where the trees grew quiet and the lanterns dimmed to embers, stood a small pavilion made of lacquered wood and glass, framed by trailing wisteria that swayed like whispers. Inside, rows of delicate drawers lined the walls, each no bigger than a palm, each labeled with a name, a moment, or a single word. "This," the girl murmured, "is the pavilion of still letters." He stepped softly inside, as though entering someone else's memory. "What are they?" he asked, eyes roaming the countless drawers. "They are the things you never said," she whispered. "The words caught in your throat, the feelings sealed in silence, the truths left unsent." He reached out instinctively, opening one at random. Inside thin paper, aged and yellowed, ink smudged by time. "I'm proud of you," it read in his handwriting. "I just didn't know how to say it," he swallowed. "That was for my apprentice," he said, voice barely audible. "I thought he didn't need to hear it, but he did," she replied gently. "And now you remember." Drawer after drawer, he opened them slowly, each one releasing something gentle into the air. A quiet apology, a long withheld thank you, a confession of longing. Each letter was a sigh, a release, a petal in the still air. "They aren't angry," he said at last. "No," she said, "they were only waiting. Words have patience." He walked the rows with reverence, pausing at drawers that tugged at his soul. One read, "I forgive you." He opened it. It was blank. He turned to her. "You never wrote it," she said, "but you meant it, deep down. Even before you admitted it to yourself." He nodded slowly. "Can I write them now?" he asked. She led him to a small table at the heart of the pavilion. Upon it paper, ink, a single candle burning low. "You may write one," she said. "Just one?" "It will be enough." He sat, and in the silence, in the hush between old breaths, he wrote. Not a long letter, Not a perfect one, just true, just tender. He folded it, sealed it, and slid it into an empty drawer labeled only. Now, the pavilion seemed to exhale, its wood settling, the wisteria shifting as if touched by grace. The girl took his hand again. You carried all these words for so long, she said. But not every thought is meant to be buried. Some must bloom. He looked back once at the drawers, now gently humming with peace. I never thought silence could be so loud, he whispered. And now, she said, guiding him toward the path once more, it no longer needs to be. They walked into the deepening quiet, where the sky grew softer and the trees leaned in like listeners. They followed the path beyond the pavilion, where the garden narrowed into a gentle valley. There, spanning a stream so still it seemed made of glass, stood a bridge arching, delicate, carved from pale stone, worn smooth by time. The Bridge of Almost. It shimmered in the moonlight, casting long shadows that didn't quite touch the ground. What is this place? The clockmaker asked, his voice already soft with knowing. This, she replied, is where what could have been rests. They stepped onto the bridge. With each step, a vision unfolded. To the left, a clock shop bustling with laughter. Had he dared to teach children instead of turning them away? To the right, a shared garden with a woman who once waited too long for him to speak his heart. Each side bloomed with almost gentle possibilities never chosen, soft forks in time that didn't turn bitter, only wistful. They aren't regrets, he said, surprised. No, the girl replied. They are petals you never picked. Paths you honored by letting go. The stream beneath rippled lightly, as if stirred by memory. He stopped midway across the bridge. One vision rose clearer than the rest. A child his own face, but younger, tinkering with gears, smiling up at someone unseen. Who is that? He asked, heart caught in his throat. She looked at him with kind eyes. The version of you who became a father, she said. One possibility still blooming in another corner of time. He blinked back a tear. Would I have been good at it? You would have been you, she whispered. And that would have been enough. He leaned over the bridge rail, watching as a windless breeze stirred the stream into soft ripples. The child waved. Not with sadness, but with peace. And then the vision faded, like steam lifting off tea. You don't have to choose it now, she said gently. Only acknowledge it lived inside you. He nodded slowly. The bridge no longer felt fragile. It felt like grace. By the time they reached the other side, the garden felt closer, less dream, more truth. He looked back once. The bridge shimmered once more. Then stilled. Where do we go from here? He asked. She smiled. Toward the part of the garden that always knew you would arrive. Beyond the bridge, the path wound through a corridor of whispering bamboo, each stem bending slightly as if bowing in quiet reverence. The wind here was gentle, a sigh through green leaves, carrying scents of cedarwood and tea. At the end of the corridor stood a small wooden door. The girl stopped and placed her hand gently on the frame. This is the room, she said, her voice the quietest it had ever been, the one that waited. For what? He asked. For you. She stepped aside, letting him pass. Inside was a room that felt like memory wrapped in worn shelves of ticking clocks. Soft cushions on the floor, a low table set with a single cup of tea still steaming. On the far wall, a window framed a garden pond bathed in moonlight, koi fish gliding like strokes of ink. But it wasn't the beauty that caught his breath. It was the presence. Faint at first, but unmistakable. As if the room had been lived in all this time, as if someone had kept it just the way he would have liked. It's mine, he said aloud, hardly believing it. But I never built it. No, she replied softly, but you imagined it. And the garden remembers everything we imagine with love. He moved to the cushion and sat. Time slowed. The clocks around him ticked not in unison, but in harmony like a lullaby composed from forgotten lullabies. He took the cup of tea in his hands. It smelled of jasmine and old summers. On a small shelf by the window, he found a wooden box. Inside, pieces of paper folded with care. Tiny sketches, short poems, scraps of hopes and thoughts. Some were in his handwriting, some were not. He turned to her, eyes misted. "Did you write these?" She nodded. "Whenever you left a thought unfinished, I kept it safe." He placed a hand over his heart. "I always thought I was alone in my thoughts," he said. "You never were," she whispered. The room began to shimmer, not with light, but with stillness, as though the garden itself had leaned in to listen. "You don't need to go farther," she said. "This is the last room. It's the heart of the garden. You build it without knowing." "Now you found it," he set down the cup. Looked once more at the shelves, the ticking, the koi. It was perfect, not because it was everything he ever wanted, but because it was everything he'd ever needed. Peace, gentle, patient, true. He turned to her. "I think I'm ready." She smiled, not sadly, not joyfully, but as if she'd been waiting to hear that for centuries. And then the window opened with a sigh, and the scent of home drifted in. The window in the room that waited opened wide, and the wind that entered was warm not from the sun, but from memory. It carried the scent of old forests and new beginnings, of turned earth and soft rain. The girl stood beside the clockmaker, her lantern now dimmed to a golden ember. "This is where I leave you," she said, her voice like a lullaby fading into the hush. He looked at her, not with fear, not with sadness, but with a quiet fullness that only comes when something has been understood. "You were never a ghost," he whispered. "No," she replied, "only a guide, a part of the garden, a part of you." He nodded. From the window, a bridge of light appeared, arching not over water, but over memory. It shimmered with pieces of his life, the laughter of a friend long gone, the scent of a shop at dusk, the click of tools in steady hands. Each step on that bridge would not take him away from himself, but deeper into what he had always been. He stood. The clocks around him all began to chime, not loudly, not in urgency, but in welcome. He turned once more to the girl. "Will I remember all of this?" She smiled. "Not with your mind, but your soul will hum with it every time you pause to listen." He stepped through the window. The garden didn't end, it unfolded. 1,000 new paths. 1,000,000 soft moments. And at the center, always, the gentle ticking of love remembered. The lantern's light went out, and the night became whole.